This is Politics Media 101. I'm Jeff Browning. No matter where you live in the world, you may know the U.S. state of Nevada as home of Las Vegas, a boomtown in the Mojave Desert with legendary casinos. But if you follow American politics and elections, then you also know that in almost every single election cycle, the state of Nevada is critical to the outcome, either because its Senate seats are competitive and play a key role in determining which party controls the Senate, or because the state itself is competitive in presidential races and plays a key role in determining who wins control of the White House. There's almost no one anywhere who knows more about Nevada politics than Jon Ralston. He writes for the Nevada Independent and is a close observer of everything that happens on the political scene there, as well as how it impacts the national conversation. As a reminder, like all of our episodes, this is an edited version of a longer conversation that was taped live with audience questions. For information about how to join us or past episodes, please visit our website, pm101.live. Please also take a second to subscribe on whichever streaming service you're using right now so you don't miss our next episode coming this Friday. Without any further ado, let's roll the tape.
Everybody knows Las Vegas. For those of us who are from the outside and don't know much more about the state, can you tell us what are the other industries that matter to Nevada? Other than Las Vegas and hospitality, what are the other engines of the Nevada economy?
Well, I mean, everything is dwarfed by the gambling industry, the casinos here. And so there are other industries. Mining is still a factor in rural Nevada. The construction industry, especially when times are going well, here is a major player. But it's really gaming and everything else.
In the 2020 primary, to bring everybody back, there was, I believe, and maybe you can walk us through this, a pretty big spat between Bernie Sanders and the Culinary Labor Union. And despite that spat, where the union leaders didn't agree with the policies pushed by a candidate, Bernie still won the state with, I think it was 46% of the vote to Biden's 20% of the vote. So in Nevada, do you think that the unions really don't matter politically anymore because their normal workers and workforce are just not going to listen to the bosses in the way they want to vote?
Well, I think it depends on the union. Now, when you're talking about the Culinary Union is still by far the most powerful union in the state because it's got by far the most members. It's got 50 to 60,000 members and no one else is close. And you're right about them going against Bernie in 2020, and they were against Bernie in 2016 as well. But this is a misnomer, though, because this is a caucus, and it's not necessarily representative. It was in 2020, at least. It's not necessarily representative of what the Democratic Party looks like in a general election or even in a regular primary election. And the Bernie people were just very, very good at organizing for the caucus, and the Biden folks got started here way too late. And the Culinary did not endorse Biden. It just kind of stood on the sidelines and threw these missiles at Bernie. And so it's not an apples to apples comparison to say that this affects what's going to happen in the general election.
Since we're talking about the dominance of Las Vegas in Nevada's politics, I'm also curious about how that's reflected in the population, not just in the economic GDP impact. I've seen some data that shows that Nevada is the number one state in the country in federal land ownership, that 80% of Nevada's land is owned by the federal government. So it leaves me wondering, is the remaining population centers that are part of the state, is it very much concentrated around Las Vegas, or are there other parts of the state that we should be thinking about when we're thinking about what Nevada is and the way its politics operate?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's even more than 80% is owned by the federal government. It's actually upwards of 85%. And just to give everybody a perspective who's not familiar with Nevada, Nevada essentially has two urban areas, Las Vegas area and Reno. And then there are 15 other counties that are rural Nevada. And a lot of that out there is federal land, even though there's federal land down here in Clark County where Las Vegas is as well. And so The politics of the state can really be divided into those three areas: Clark County, where Las Vegas is, Washoe County, where Reno is, and then the other 15 counties. There are 17 counties in the state. And so it becomes, with Las Vegas representing about 70% of the population and having essentially been the Democratic base for decades, it's, can Republicans make incursions into the Democratic strongholds in southern Nevada and win big in rural Nevada and do all right in Reno? And that's how they win statewide races.
So have Republicans succeeded in developing some foothold in these population centers? You mentioned Reno as being an area where they're maybe building from a little bit, obviously the rural parts of the state. But how much inroads are they making in these three population centers? And do those three centers have a very different kind of character and personality?
They do. I mean, Las Vegas is very different than Reno. And of course, the rural counties are very different than either of the urban areas. Now, Republicans are always going to do well in rural Nevada. They're going to win by landslides of some size. It was, when I started covering politics here 3.5 decades ago, Washoe County was a reliably Republican county. And so the Republican strategy would be to do very well in rural Nevada, win Washoe County by 5 to 10 points, and then just not get killed in Clark County to win statewide races. But Washoe has swung, and it has gone to the Democrats the last few cycles, and that has made the Republican task here much, much more difficult. Joe Biden only won Clark County by 9 points and still won the election here by 2.5 points, only because he did so well in Washoe County. The conventional wisdom has been for years that if a Democrat doesn't win Clark County by double digits, he's probably going to lose. Biden won by just under double digits because Washoe County, at least since the 2016 election, has become a swing county. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens this year if it swings back towards the Republicans with the presumed red wave coming.
You know, it's kind of funny, John, because when we're talking about Las Vegas's outsized influence, you know, you're describing it as the Democratic bastion in terms of its impact on the electorate. But when we look at some of the key personalities that come out of Las Vegas, in some ways, they also punch way above their weight on the Republican side as well. And that's partly because of these mega donors that came out of Las Vegas. I'm thinking of two people in particular who are so well known nationally. The first one is Steve Wynn, who was the Republican National Committee Finance Chair until he resigned a couple of years ago. And the other is Sheldon Adelson, who recently died, but whose family are still pretty active. And I'm kind of interested to ask about how Sheldon Adelson's legacy is carrying on after his death, because his family are still enormously powerful people. His wife, Miriam, has, I believe, around $27 billion, and she donated $91 million to PACs that were supporting Donald Trump in the last election. So as the baton has passed from Sheldon to Miriam Adelson, do we see any differences in the way that they're approaching politics? Or is it very much a continuation of what we had?
We don't know the answer to that yet, because we really haven't seen Miriam get that active, except for some of the donations that you've mentioned. And there are conflicting opinions on whether she's going to spend any time at all trying to influence Nevada politics, stick to national politics, or maybe even more so, try to be influential in her native Israel, where she has always had interest. The Adelson family is divested itself of its Las Vegas holdings. And so there's also a question about, even though the headquarters remains here, whether they are going to really stay here and be a force here. They still own a major newspaper, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and the question is whether they're going to hold on to that. It was widely seen when Sheldon Adelson bought that in 2015 that was just another extension of their political influence in the state. But the jury's really out on whether Miriam Adelson is going to try to have an impact the way that Sheldon Adelson did in state politics. National politics, I think she's already shown some interest. We don't know yet in state politics.
So I did want to follow up on that. For those who aren't watching state politics in Nevada that closely, maybe they see the state really over the last, 8 years, decade or so, turning blue. What type of impact and the legacy did Sheldon have on the state level politics?
Well, he was generally unsuccessful in trying to influence politics here in Nevada, whether at the local or state level. But that is not as much a function of him failing as much as the Democrats building this machine under the late Harry Reid that was essentially able to beat all comers. There's been some exceptions to that. And one of them was someone that Sheldon Adelson supported, a guy by the name of Adam Laxalt, who ran and won in a huge upset for Attorney General in 2014, but then lost for governor and is now running for the U.S. Senate. But they're not even heavily involved in that anymore. This has been a state that has been turning bluish for several cycles now. Again, the jury's out on what's going to happen in 2022. But 16, 18, and 20 were all big Democratic years here. And so if you were supporting Republican candidates in the state, you weren't going to do very well.
So, John, we were talking about Sheldon Adelson and his impact on the state. We also mentioned Steve Wynn. What are the other big figures that we should think about? Are there mega donors, other ones on the Republican side? Are there especially any on the Democratic side that we should think about? Who are the other people that are influencing politics in the state financially?
Well, on the Republican side, no one comes close to Adelson or what Wynn did when Wynn is here. He lives in Florida now and is not active at all here in Nevada politics. Really, you have the Fertitta family, which owns the Station Casino franchise here. They have a ton of locals casinos in town, and they're building others, and they are billionaires. Both the brothers, Frank and Lorenzo, are billionaires, and they are very active in politics, although they were never quite as active as Sheldon Adelson or Steve Wynn. But they are significant players on the political scene here. But they have played the game a little bit more than Adelson did in terms of giving to both sides, because they have seen which way the winds have blown. And by the way, they supported Democratic governors because the governor has immense power over their businesses. On the Democratic side, as far as in-state donors go, you've had some of the companies at times, like MGM Resorts, which is a huge company here, support Democrats, but the leadership of these companies has changed. And one guy who became a billionaire through the timeshare business by the name of Steve Klubeck has been very active in Democratic politics, a protege of Harry Reid, and he still contributes a lot of money.
It's funny you mentioned the Fertitta family. I think Frank and Lorenzo are the ones you mentioned. And their cousin, Tillman Fertitta, he's quite a notorious figure because he owns the Houston Rockets. He bought them from Leslie Alexander. But also, he was linked to some major corruption scandals in the last presidential administration. There was a huge, I believe it was a New York Times article that was going into all these details of pay to play that was happening in U.S. politics, where some of these major figures were paying a lot of money into Trump properties and receiving benefits. And Tillman Fertitta was one of the focuses of that piece. Does he have a foothold in Nevada as well, or his relationship to the other two a little bit more distant if they're only cousins?
Yeah, it is a little bit more distant, and he is really not a player in Nevada politics at all compared to Franklin and Lorenzo. I know about the Trump closeness and scandal and all the rest of that, but he is just not a big factor here.
The question that was raised by those 2020 election results, where we saw significant movement away from the Democrats toward Republicans among Hispanic voters. The immediate question is it still continuing in 2022? The longer term question is 24 and beyond. So let's take a look at the numbers to put this in some perspective. Here's the trajectory of what it's looked like among Hispanic voters. If you go back to Trump versus Clinton in 2016, Hillary Clinton won among Hispanic voters by almost 40 points. Trump got 28% of the Hispanic vote. For Republicans in the Trump midterm, the 28 midterm, things got even worse. In the 28 midterms, the Democratic margin there swells to nearly 50 points. But this is where the story then took a twist. Between 18 and 20, between that midterm and Trump's reelection campaign, this is the shift we saw among Hispanic voters. Look at that. That 47-point midterm margin for Democrats came all the way down to 21 points. Trump's share of the Hispanic vote nearly reaching 40%.
So I wanted to get a little bit into the demographics because a lot of people consider, like you mentioned, the caucus win by Bernie in large part due to his ability to energize some of the Hispanic vote. And the state has 30% Hispanic population. Now, you've alluded to the potential for a GOP wave. I think that a lot of people would agree with that nationwide. But pollsters have been raising the alarm for Democrats, nationally speaking, about them leaking Hispanic voters. And there's many issues that they point to. I'm wondering if this is of a concern to Democrats in the state. And if, from your reporting, from looking at the polls, from even talking to people in the state day to day, that you're seeing some of this slippage with Hispanic voters going from Democrat to independent or independent to the GOP.
Yeah, it's certainly going on here, and Democrats are concerned about it, the extent to which it's happening. And one reason they're concerned about it is, and you mentioned the numbers, the 30% population, the percentage of the electorate that has been made up by Hispanics has gotten as high as the low 20s in recent elections, and they have voted overwhelmingly for Democrats. And it started way back in 2010 when Harry Reid harnessed the power of the Hispanic vote to win an election most people thought he was going to lose. And then the Hispanic vote became pivotal in every presidential cycle since then. It crushed Mitt Romney here in 2012, and it helped in 2016 and 2020 here, although less so in 2020. So it's key for the Democrats, and the Republicans are very aware of the inroads that can be made with the Hispanic community. You didn't ask about this, but it just happened this week. They're also hoping to make inroads in the AAPI community, and the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee was here for an event this time that they have voted 60-40 in 2020 for the Democrats, and all they have to do is make a little bit of inroads in these demographic groups, the Republicans figure, and they can win a bunch of races in this state.
Yeah, so let's go to the AAPI. Now, inroads. So, for example, Republicans have been working really hard on messaging to working class people while not doing anything policy-wise to necessarily help them out that's different from, the last 30 or 40 years of policy. Are they just paying lip service to this demographic, or do you see any types of changes in policy platforms or positions that they're taking to win these voters over in specifically the AAPI community?
I think they are seizing on what they see as a perceived weakness of Joe Biden. They are seizing on what they see as a sense in some pockets of the AAPI and Hispanic communities, and maybe even the African-American communities, that the Democrats have taken them for granted, and that the Democrats have not done much to help them, despite having at least the perceived power to do so. And I think Republicans are not, as you mentioned, presenting any new policy prescriptions to appeal to these folks. They're operating on negative messaging. And, that works. And we'll see how much it works this time.
So, John, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the Hispanic or Spanish-speaking voters in Nevada. We had Mike Madrid on this program. Mike Madrid, as most people listening probably know, is someone who works on Hispanic voter outreach in the Republican Party. He's since sort of defected from the GOP because of Trump, but he's still a widely sought-after commenter on voters in the Hispanic American community. And something that he really emphasized when he was talking to us was that if you look at national numbers about Hispanic American voters, what you're really seeing are numbers about Mexican American voters, because they're overwhelmingly the largest group inside of the Hispanic American community. And we're especially seeing Californian Mexican Americans, because that's a group of millions and millions of people that very much overwhelms both non-Californian Mexican Americans and other Spanish-speaking groups in the country. So this may be curious, John. In Nevada, of course, borders California. Is the Hispanic American electorate in Nevada also overwhelmingly Mexican American, or does it also include people from backgrounds linked to other Spanish-speaking countries?
It is overwhelmingly Mexican American, but there are pockets of, for instance, Cuban Americans where Republicans have been able to make inroads because there's a lot of conservatives in that cohort of Hispanics. But even among the Mexican Americans, they've been able to make inroads with a variety of different pitches to them. But Mexican Americans dominate here as they do in California.
So, John, let's look at the state of the race as it is now. So we know that the primary is coming, I think it's June 14th in Nevada. And then, of course, there will be a general election that includes a U.S. Senate race in November. Because of the news of this week that Politico published this draft opinion, which suggests that the Supreme Court majority might overturn Roe v. Wade. This is leading to a little bit of speculation about how the state of the race might have changed. Do you think that that's something that, as of today, is having a big impact in the landscape in Nevada?
Well, there's no polling that shows that yet. It's too early. I've learned not to wildly speculate unless I have data that can help me wildly speculate, if you know what I mean. So I don't think we know yet. That there is some national polling that's out today that shows it has affected the dynamic very little, if at all, but we still don't know. We haven't seen the actual opinion yet and what it's going to say. It's probably going to be a couple of months before we see that. But the phenomenon that we have seen is that Republicans are like the dog that caught the car, right? They don't know what to do and they don't want to talk about it. And that's why they're focusing on the leak. And Democrats are just all over this, right? They are all over it, trying to change the topic from gas prices and COVID and anything else that may be a net negative for them to talk about abortion, especially in a state like Nevada, where polling shows 2-to-1 or greater that people are pro-choice. And so, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on a lot of different things. Again, so many things can intervene between now and the election that could make this either more or less important. And so, listen, the Senate race here, you asked for the state of play. It's close. Every poll has shown it relatively close. And that's because Catherine Cortez Masto is a freshman who was tied to the administration just because of her party. And so she's not that well known as someone should be, probably, who's been around in politics as long as she has. She was a 2-term attorney general as well. And so the Republicans have a chance to take that seat, and they know it. And there's a lot of money already being poured into this state because it's considered one of the states that could determine control of the Senate.
Yeah, John, I'm kind of glad that you mentioned that Cortez Masto doesn't have huge name recognition, because us here on the East Coast are not that familiar with her. And of course, we were very familiar with a previous senator from Nevada, Harry Reid. Even I think Jackie Rose and the other U.S. senator is quite well known nationally, especially in comparison to Cortez Masto. Does she have anything that she can bring back to the state for accomplishments that she can brag about? I mean, often we've got workhorses and show horses. Sometimes the people who aren't on television all the time are working hard on legislation. Does she have any big accomplishments like that? Has she been working on any policy matters that she can bring back to the state?
Well, let me just push back on a couple of the analogies you made earlier, and then I'll answer that question. It's obviously not fair to compare her to Harry Reid, who was in office for 30 years and became the leader of the Senate Democrats. So obviously he was a lot better known nationally than she was. And Jackie Rosen, I don't think is very well known at all nationally either. She's the junior senator and hasn't been in office very long. But Catherine Cortez Masto has frustrated Democrats here in the state by not taking a higher profile, by not getting her name recognition and recognition for what she may be doing in Washington. The advantage that incumbents have, as you know, is especially in campaign years, they can start sending out these releases about X millions of dollars that they've been able to bring back to the state. I mean, Reid was a master at doing that. She's starting to do some of that right now, but, people are pretty locked in, even in May, in a race like that, where it's 30, 35%, maybe a little bit more on each side. And then there's only 20% or so, maybe 25% of the electorate that's left that you have to convince one way or the other. And independent registration has gone up in this state, and that's really what's going to make the difference. Can she convince people that she is not just a clone of the administration, does their bidding, whatever, and that she's an independent senator who gets things done for Nevada? That was the Reid playbook. We'll see if she can execute it.
You have senators like Mark Warner, Shelley Moore Capito on the other side, who are maybe not super duper national figures, but are driving consensus, driving deals. Even Kristen Sinema, for example, who's recently gotten into the Senate. She is a national figure, but she also drives work on policy. And then Jackie Rosen has carved out a very nice little niche for herself, specifically on cybersecurity policy issues, cyber workforce policy issues, and she's well respected in Washington, D.C. I can say with fair confidence that I don't know anything that Cortez Masto does, not necessarily in the media, but I'm talking about policy work. Is there anything that is an issue that she's passionate about and takes leadership on? Because she's clearly not making a name for herself in the press during hearings or actually getting legislation passed behind the scenes.
So you're just one of these D.C. bubble guys who thinks that what's known in D.C. is what occurs in the rest of the country? Is that what I'm to gather here?
Well, that's why we have you on.
You used the right term earlier, this difference between workhorse and show horse. And there's no question that she's a workhorse. She has been that way her entire career. But you know what? Part of your job, whether it's as AG or senator, is to tell the constituents what you're working on. Right? And so I don't think she's done a very good job of doing that. She does not like being on TV. She does not like taking a high profile on things. Remind you of anybody that might have come before her? So, but she's only a freshman, and so she doesn't have the gravitas yet of a Harry Reid, who just steadily worked his way up through the rungs of leadership and became the most powerful guy in the history of Nevada. So I think she has a real problem there. I don't think the phenomenon that I jokingly said is just one of the D.C. bubble is one that she can ignore. And the question is, does she have enough time in a campaign season to try to reverse that to an extent and essentially say, hey, remember me? I'm your senator. Here's what I've done for you. She has a lot of money. The Democrats will spend a lot of money trying to do that. And I think that they definitely think that the choice issue is going to help her, especially if Adam Laxalt is the nominee on the other side.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to him just next. So when I was political appointee for Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria, we had to work very closely with Rick Scott, who's a senator, and who could be the most awkward person in politics. He doesn't have any gravitas. He's very weird. It's creepy. We're on stage with him at many events and work closely with him. Comparing now, using the contrast of Rick Scott, how does Senator Cortez Masto do as a retail politician and then on the stump speech? Please tell me she has more gravitas than Rick Scott.
I think that's a very low bar for her to get over, and I think that she gets over it. She was criticized a lot early in her Senate career, being a very awkward public speaker and not being able to move crowds. I think she's gotten better at it. Remember, she did take, and I think Reid urged her to do this, stewardship of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. So she traveled to other states last cycle and got more experience doing those kinds of things. But, you know, no one is going to confuse her with Margaret Thatcher. But the bottom line is that how much does that matter anymore in modern politics, especially in a Senate race, when it's all about media, right? And so who runs the better campaign, who puts the better ads on, who gets luckier in terms of what issues come and go, I think will determine this more than whether she's well-known or can give a stem winder of a speech. I think it'll be interesting to see how many debates there are. I know people outside of my business don't pay much attention to the whole debate over debates, but if there are a significant number of debates, that could have a huge impact on this race.
Justin, I just wanted to interject because, you're describing Rick Scott's lack of social graces, and I'm chuckling here as I remember the time when Rick Scott refused to go on stage during a U.S. Senate debate because his opponent, Charlie Crist, was using a small personal fan on his knees. And Rick Scott was standing off stage in the wing, refusing to go out on stage because of the fan. Do you remember that?
I do not.
I do. I remember that.
Yeah. That was quite a moment in U.S. politics.
Nevada's former attorney general now has his sights set on the U.S. Senate. Republican Adam Laxalt launched his 2022 campaign, making him the most prominent member of the party to enter the race so far. Laxalt was also the public face of the Trump campaign's legal challenges to the 2020 election results in Nevada. He is looking to unseat Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, who is up for her first re-election in 2022. This race could figure heavily into the balance of power in the Senate, which is currently split 50-50.
Adam Laxalt does have a family history of politics, specifically Nevada politics. His grandfather was governor of Nevada, was a two-term senator from Nevada. Adam Laxalt was Nevada's attorney general. He won in 2014. He ran for governor here in 2018, lost that race by about 4 percentage points.
Every time I talk to former colleagues who worked at the RNC with me, or political strategists, or even columnists that come on this show, Republicans are very bullish on not only the House, but the Senate. And every single conversation has it running through Nevada with the way that they go about how they're going to retake the Senate. They view this as a critical seat, but they view this as a seat that they can pick up. So let's start off with the primary race between Laxalt and I believe it is Sam Brown. So a new poll out May 4th from The Hill, I'm reading the article, shows that Laxalt's at 50%, Sam Brown's at 27%. Is this race done? Is there even a race that we should be discussing?
It's a really good question. Now, as you know, primaries can be strange, right? You can have low turnout and you can have upsets occur in primaries. I think Laxalt is going to win the race. He should win the race. But Sam Brown has kind of come on the scene here, and nobody, including myself, had ever heard of Sam Brown before this cycle. And he suddenly appeared in the state, and he was kind of dismissed, even though he's got this great story to tell about his service and his heroism. But no one knew who he was. And then suddenly he started getting this grassroots support and financial support, and he's raised more than $1 million each of the last 3 quarters, which is a lot for a small state like Nevada. Trust me. And so he's been able to do some things. And he has now trained his guns very nastily towards Adam Laxalt, and very smartly lumped Adam Laxalt in with Catherine Cortez Masto as a career politician. I still think it's going to be very difficult for him to win by just suddenly appearing in a state in the way that, by the way, Adam Laxalt suddenly appeared in the state in 2014 when no one had heard of him before. But so it's very difficult for some guy to come in and win a race when he has not been seen before. Now, I will say that last weekend at the state Republican convention, Laxalt could not get the endorsement of the Republican Party, and Sam Brown did. And so that was very, listen, I'm not saying that's representative of the primary electorate, but it's certainly representative of a segment of the primary electorate. Half the people in that room voted not to endorse Adam Laxalt, and Sam Brown got it overwhelmingly. So, is that an aberration or a canary in the coal mine for June 14th? I don't know.
So let's get into Laxalt, because it's, especially in this primary season, you don't necessarily see establishment politicians from the Republican Party and then Donald Trump all get behind the same person like we're seeing with Laxalt. So how is he running his campaign? Is it a little mini Trump? Is it something mirroring the establishment? What should we make of how he's going about trying to secure up the primary and then heading into the general?
It's a great question, because he is one of the rare candidates who has both been thoroughly endorsed by Trump and by Mitch McConnell and the Republican establishment in D.C. But listen, all those old guys in D.C. still remember Paul Laxalt, and they think the name has resonance here. That's Adam Laxalt's grandfather, who was a legendary figure in the state and was Ronald Reagan's best friend and was in the Senate for quite some time. But Adam Laxalt is not Paul Laxalt. Adam Laxalt didn't grow up in Nevada. He grew up in Virginia and Washington, D.C., came back here specifically to run about 10 years ago, and has not acquitted himself well since he won in a very narrow upset in 2014. He ran a terrible race for governor. He actually looked very foolish as the leader of the Big Lie caucus here after 2020. And so he just spouts the shibboleths of the Republican Party these days. And it's all superficialities. But you know what? That may be enough to win.
Is it enough to piss off the Democrats and energize turnout, though?
Yes, potentially. Potentially it is. I just don't want to predict anything when it's May 6th and the election is still quite some time away. And I guarantee that the national folks, including McConnell, while they're all behind him, know that he is not a good candidate and that he needs bolstering. And they're going to have to do a lot for him in the general.
So, John, this is going to be my last question. Then we're just going to go to some audience members. At the state level, across the country, we've seen a very troubling trend if you're a Republican or a Democrat, where you have a lot of freaks running on Trump's big lie in positions where they will oversee elections. And these people are running on the big lie to the point where they're saying Trump won in 2020. Not only that, if they were elected or they will be elected, they won't allow this to happen in 2024, implying some type of usurpation of our electoral process through the Electoral College and state laws. Are we seeing these absolutely insane people who are putting our democracy at risk also running in Nevada, and are they viable if they are even running in Nevada?
There was one in particular running for Secretary of State, which is the office, as you and your listeners know, oversees elections, by the name of Jim Marchant, who is completely embraced all of the conspiracies, goes to the Mike Lindell conventions, and just says all kinds of utter nonsense. And he has a chance to win that primary. The establishment Republicans are so worried about that here that at not quite the 11th hour, but almost got another candidate into that race to run against him. But and he will be better funded than Marchant. But I'm not sure that Marchant is going to lose that primary. I don't think I'm hoping that Nevadans are not crazy enough to elect him. The Democratic candidate's a pretty solid candidate for Secretary of State. And if you don't know, the Secretary of State now is a Republican who actually stood up to her party and people like Laxalt and others and said that Trump lost, that there was no widespread fraud, and took a lot of heat for that. And now she's term limited, and so that seat is open. But there are others in other races doing the same thing, races for Congress, races for some of the other statewide offices. It's not just the Senate and governor's race. Every constitutional office is up in Nevada this cycle. And so there are these crazies, all over the place. But Jim Marchant is the most dangerous because he's running for Secretary of State.
We're going to go to the audience now for some questions. And the first two people that we're going to go to are both Nevadans, or at least Nevada residents. So we're going to go first to Abby.
So first of all, I'm going to ask the question, and I'm going to pronounce the name of the state correctly, which is Nevada.
I wasn't going to correct my host. I was going to be well-behaved today, Abby.
Well, again,
I'm going to correct
we're playing the role of the outsiders here.
Okay, it's Nevada.
We've done it on purpose.
Right. So, John, two questions. One has to do with the redistricting and the effect you think it's going to have on the House elections, and then also what you think with both the primaries of Titus and Horsford, and what you think is going to happen with the media buys on those.
Let me take the second question first. Titus is almost certainly going to win that primary, but it's got to be very irritating to her to have a progressive challenger when she has been progressive most of her career. Amy Vilela, who's running against her, has raised a decent amount of money, but I don't think she's going to be much more than a thorn in her side. But again, let's watch those when that primary is done. Let's see how much of the base votes for Dina Titus. Those congressional races, 3 of the 4 seats in Nevada, are in play, though, because of redistricting. I don't want to belabor all of this, Abby, but I don't think the Democrats had much choice but to try to bolster Susie Lee's district. She was in the swing district and Horsford's district by putting more Democrats in there from Dina Titus's district. Those are all still strong Democratic districts, but in a red wave year with good candidates, any of them could lose. As you know, there are a lot of candidates in both Congressional District 4 and Congressional District 1 on the Republican side. If the Republicans nominate decent candidates in those races, they will have a chance to win. They already have a credible candidate who's going to win in CD3 in April Becker, even though she was part of the big lie last cycle. I still think that she's raised a ton of money, and she's going to be viable against Susie Lee, who is very, very vulnerable in the swing district that is not as much of a swing anymore. So the Democrats had to gamble with redistricting. I don't think they could have done much more than what they did, but all 3 of those seats are in play, and the National Republican Congressional Committee is very, very excited about winning those seats.
Aram, over to you.
Thanks, Justin, and thanks for being here,
Sure.
John. Like a lot of Western states, Nevada has a pretty strong contingent of right-wing militia types. Eamon Bundy is probably the most famous one. It seems to me from the outside as a Californian that there's a pretty big divide there between what I would sort of see as like the Adelson base of the Republican Party, where a lot of the money is, and that sort of right-wing militia type that's much more likely to be Trumper. I'm just wondering how that division's playing out and how you might see that impacting the 2022 races.
It's a great question, and you're right. There is a divide. It's occurring in the Republican Party across the country, but it's especially pronounced in a Western state like Nevada, which has a history of things like the Sagebrush Rebellion, where you have the 87% of federal land that the ranchers have and others in rural Nevada have been very upset about for decades. And I think it has hardened the rural Nevada vote against Democrats. And that is how Adam Laxalt got elected as Attorney General. He's the first statewide candidate to win in rural Nevada and lose the 2 urban areas and still be elected statewide. Those numbers are really, really bad for Democrats in all of those other counties. Now, they still can't make up for the population in the urban areas, but if you win by a big enough margin in those rural counties, which are not dominated, but they are peppered with the kind of voters that you're referring to, you leave the Democrats very little margin for error in Clark and Washoe counties. So the Bundy family is the classic example of it, and there was a standoff at the Bundy Ranch, and Ammon's father, Cliven, was part of that, didn't pay his grazing fees for years as part of a rebellion against the federal government. That is very, very strong, and probably stronger than ever now in rural Nevada, and will be a factor in these elections.
That concludes our conversation for today. Again, huge thanks to Jon Ralston of the Nevada Independent, to our audience for their questions, and most importantly, to you for being here. As a reminder, like all of our episodes, this is an edited version of a longer conversation that was taped live with audience questions. For information on how to join us and past episodes, please visit our website, pm101.live. Please also take a second to subscribe on whichever streaming service you're using right now, so you don't miss our next episode coming this Friday. This has been Politics and Media 101, produced in partnership with Clubhouse. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for being a part of this community. I'm Jeff Browning. On behalf of Justin Higgins and John Gunnison, our co-founders, we hope to hear from you soon.